had a couple days down for squad training.
I did, Dave.
Never talked to Tony since he went down.
He came back Thursday afternoon after they released him. He was
Good.
doing
Okay, I believe we're ready to start the work session here, and I think the main topic here is an update on the emergency radio communication system. So we shall start. Jeff.
Okay. Jack's got a brief PowerPoint presentation that he'll just flip through so you can follow along there, and we've also got a couple of pictures that we're going to take a look at today.
Okay.
Wanted to just give you a brief update because back in June we had a major milestone on the radio project. Jack, you can go ahead and jump to the next slide. We completed factory staging in Schaumburg at Motorola headquarters June 24th through the 26th. We had with us our bid evaluation team, which consisted of some of our user entities, including the cities and some of the fire district representatives as well. All of that testing was completed, all of the tests were successful, and as soon as we left the facility there on June 26th, the equipment shipped out. Most of the equipment has gone to Virginia, where the shelter manufacturer is located, but the backup master site is already here. It's down in the administration building, and are we all up and running yet, actually, or not quite yet?
We are finalizing electrical, and mid-September it will be up and running.
Okay. Next slide, Jack. Wanted to give you an update since we have completed site acquisition. I think I had sent the council an email update with those final list of sites. And Jack, go ahead and just flip through the next two slides. Got the addresses here. You can go a little bit slower on those last two. Of all of the 12 tower sites, this list is still and has been building on the website as we've otherwise acquired that first list of sites second list of sites were the sites that we had purchased. So we're utilizing 7 existing county-owned sites, and then we have 4 others that were acquired at Schlersburg, Schrader, Riverdale, and Veterans Memorial Parkway, and then we have a lease arrangement for ground, but the tower that we'll own up at Ameren. We have started construction on tower sites as well, and so this is a list of the first 4 sites that have construction underway right now. This next slide is the photograph of crews out pouring the tower footings at the St. Peter's Howell Road shed site. So people will be seeing construction going on, and again, we'll kind of providing updates on the website of how things are going and when people will be seeing more activity at some of those sites. I've got a final coverage map for you. If you kind of remember on how to take a look at these coverage maps, just because the map doesn't show green does not mean that you don't have coverage. This is showing a particular level of voice coverage on a portable radio on the hip. And so you can see that almost all areas of the county are painted green. And some of those areas that have holes just have a lesser level of service. It does not mean, again, that you won't be able to communicate on a radio in those areas. Wanted today to kind of quickly, since we're going to be providing, we've had a lot of conversation internally in the county in reaction to the storms back in May, and how the new radio system will impact those communications and those types of events. So we've got the sheriff here today and Cottleville Fire Protection District Chief Rob Wylie, who was the incident commander on scene that night. We're just going to briefly tell you a little bit about some of the communications issues that they encountered that evening under our existing system and how some of those things will be different on the new system. So I will, Chief Wylie, since you were incident commander that evening, if you want to go first.
Sure. The events that evening started off, I don't remember the exact time, 7:30, getting on 8 o'clock. One of the first challenges we had was understanding the enormity of the storm. At first it was thought to be a bad thunderstorm, even though there were tornado warnings in the area, but quickly it became apparent that this was a tornado, that we had widespread and major damage. Almost immediately with our existing system, communications became a real challenge. The existing system, first and foremost, was designed off of a truck radio, a car radio, which has 125 watts. So the coverage design was for that level of power. Unfortunately, probably 90% of the time we're using our walkie-talkies, our portables. So the coverage issues really became glaring at that point, trying to make contact with dispatch and with other units using our portable radios, because we're not in the trucks, we're not in the cars, we're out moving through the structures trying to ascertain if we had victims trapped or injured. The analogy I would use is that we were trying to jam 18 pounds of mud into a 6-pound sack. We had, from the Cottleville district alone, had 8 units out in the field, simultaneously trying to reach dispatch for additional equipment requests, status updates, when we cleared an area and we're moving on to a next, and it just, we overloaded the system. Not to mention the fact that Central County next to us was heavily hit in the Harvester area, also trying to get in on that same pipeline. So that became a challenge. Cell phone service went down almost immediately, not only because of the volume of calls from emergency responders, but folks trying to check on their friends, their relatives, make sure they were all right. The one thing that did work, interestingly enough, was texting. I went to texting almost immediately as soon as I couldn't get a phone call out. And I would text the other assistant chiefs that were working the area, and even texted one of the dispatchers, and I can't get through on the radio, this is what I need. And we found repeatedly that texting seems to be one of the last things to crash and burn as far as communication systems. The other challenge we had was in the aftermath as we got into the 18th through 36 hour realm, where we went in and were doing secondary, tertiary checks of these areas. Also at that time, we had folks from the building department, the highway department assisting us, as well as people from the Red Cross. All of us are on different radio frequencies, so it was very difficult to coordinate our activities. My folks were going through, and their primary job was to get through each structure, make sure that we did not have anybody trapped, that everybody was accounted for, and a very cursory review of the damage to the structure. We used a standard emergency management form that listed the address, the level of damage in very rough terms. But behind that, the building department came in, and they were doing very detailed inspections on these structures. And it would have been very helpful to be able to have them on a common radio frequency where my guys could kind of go in through and triage the buildings and get the building inspectors to the ones that really needed to be evaluated for structural integrity. So the effect of not being able to do that was the building department probably spent a lot of time with their inspectors looking at buildings they didn't really need to look at, that really didn't have any big structural damages, where we could have focused them on the others. The new system will, instead of one pipe that we're trying to jam all these communications in, is going to give us multiple pipes that are open all the time. Computer selects, it finds the open pipe and sends your communications through that open pipe. So it's there. The other side of the new system is going to be the level of coverage. The new system is designed to have 98% coverage of the county from a portable radio, from a walkie-talkie. Vastly improved in coverage. So some of the areas that were not getting through, not because of traffic volume, but because of geography down in the lower areas of the bottoms, now we'll have a clear path to get in. So I think that will much improve it. And on the side of coordination, we will then have the ability, since we all have a common system, to assign talk groups. So our dispatch, the county dispatch, we could set up a group where we had a building inspector, a police officer, and a firefighter. And they could go into a neighborhood and not have to stay right next to each other because they don't have a common radio frequency, but go ahead and do their triage and then radio back to the building inspector. All right, check this address, and this address, they need a more detailed inspection. These are fine, don't worry about them. And then the police officer could also be in the loop, keeping people out that don't belong there, and they're all on a common frequency. We would call it a task group or a work group, where anybody you want to assign that has access to that frequency could be put into a work group and talk together and coordinate their activities.
Rob pretty well covered everything as far as with fire service. It was basically the same with law enforcement. There were several problems we encountered, and they're again not having the ability to communicate with fire personnel, with highway department personnel, because you all know with a tornado you have to have access to the damaged area first, and if you don't have access, you're useless. Highway department has to go in first and clear the way. Then fire personnel come in for any major issues for them, and then, of course, law enforcement comes in. But at the same time, if our personnel encounter a problem or highway encounters a problem, they need law enforcement there right away. So they would call their person after a command post was set up. You have someone from highway, someone from building, someone from fire, someone from law enforcement. So highway would call in, okay, this guy would talk to this guy would talk to this guy, and then finally you would get law enforcement en route or fire personnel, whoever it's supposed to be. So it's just been a long time coming, and ever since 9/11, or September, when the Twin Towers were bombed, the issue was brought up. There's lack of communication between public safety personnel. It was talked about before that. No one ever did anything about it. That incident is probably what brought us where we are today. And as for public safety personnel to be able to communicate with each other, I mean, communication is a secret to everything. I don't care if you're in public safety, I don't care if you're in education, whatever kind of public service you're in. So this system will enable us to do that. And they talk about the 98% from the hip. Dwayne, first thing I'm going to do when you flip the switch, I'm going down to Augusta Bottom Road, behind the quarry.
Well, it's closed now.
Can you go down there?
No, I'm getting all this part. The open part of Augusta Bottom Road. I'm going to push that button and say, can you hear me now? And if someone says, yes, I can, then after 40 years, I'm going to say, hallelujah, it's finally happening. Because it's been a long time coming. That is the most difficult facet of public service in this county, public safety in this county today, is the lack of the ability to be able to communicate.
And it's not only the big incidences like a tornado. That's certainly going to be a proving ground and really be beneficial. It's everyday incidents. We work an accident out on the highway where we have EMS, fire, State Highway Patrol, possibly the Sheriff's Department. We can't talk to each other. And if I need to shut down a lane of traffic, I have to call my dispatcher, who gets on the phone to call their dispatcher, who gets on the radio to call the trooper. It's too late. Whereas if they can assign us all to a talk group as we go to the call, which they will be able to do, we'll be able to say, shut down the inside lane. And immediately as the officers pull up, they can shut down the inside lane. So it's going to be beneficial on an everyday basis, not just on major emergencies.
They train us all in incident command, but the first thing they teach in incident command is communication. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what we're looking forward to, and that's what we've been through.
And we made I think we made the most of what we had available to us in this incident, the tornado incident. We set up a unified command post within a reasonable amount of time, I think within 2.5 hours of the initial touchdown.
2 hours, yeah.
Where in the command post, in the county's mobile command post, we had an EMS supervisor, fire supervisors, law enforcement supervisors, not only from the Sheriff's Department, but from the Highway Patrol. And then Mr. Ellman came down, Ms. Lycombe came down, Colleen came down. I mean, we had everything we needed right there. And it made things smooth and made things run the way it's supposed to run. So as we started to get a hold of the emergency part of this, we were able to go away and talk about what's coming next. How are we going to recover from this? How are we going to move forward in that area? While those supervisors had their marching orders and they were taking care of business. And all I had to do was look over and, Mr. Ellman said, what do you need? So I need highway department. I need debris removal. Boom, done. I need building inspectors. Boom, done. It was awesome. And the coordination with the law enforcement where you could get in there and clear all the sightseers out and then really lock those neighborhoods down to prevent looting, to provide safety for the responders that were still working within that venue. It all came together very well. With the new radio system, I think it'll come together faster and it'll come together faster, but it'll also come together in a way that's coordinated.
As the incident commander, though, you didn't have direct communication with all the entities that you needed communication with.
No, I had to go find
this person
somebody.
over the radio, this person over the radio, and that room got a little crowded.
It got very crowded. But we had those folks all sitting at a desk. So I had to walk out of the room and say, we need to do this. And then they would put it out to their group on that radio frequency. But how nice would it be to be able to say to one person, have them put it out on the radio, and it goes to everybody that is affected and dealing with that incident at the same time.
Okay.
One thing I will clarify, so I think a portion of our timing in terms of providing you the updates on all of the sites is also we completed a significant change order for finalizing the design of the system as we finalized all of those 12 sites. And so that number that we all have in our head of 98% at 3.4
Correct.
ended up changing slightly in the final design, and it's now like 95.3 or 95.4%. So that's something I want to make sure I clarify and specify. That's the first time probably that you all have heard that number. It's a pretty techie little thing to get to that percentage. But we had kind of discussed some of those potential site decisions that we made as to whether to go ahead and either build one specific tower for like a 2-mile area or go ahead and make the assumption that we'll have coverage off of the St. Louis County system that projects back across the river and some of those other issues. So I just wanted to make sure that we pointed that out to you. Jack, let's go back onto the slides. So going forward on implementing the new radio system, next big steps, right now we are working with all of the jurisdictions to wrap up the final terms of an intergovernmental agreement that all of the jurisdictions will be acting on in the month of September. So you'll see all of the city councils and fire districts taking up this agreement in September, so it might generate a lot of conversation and talk. Those final terms of that agreement we'll also be providing to you as a copy. All jurisdictions will need to be enacting a microwave path protection ordinance, hopefully here sometime before the end of the year, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. We anticipate that tower construction will all be completed by February 1st of 2014, and testing once the leaves are back on the trees in April through July of next year, and then final cutover onto the new system in July of 14. I believe that's also the time frame for then system acceptance in July or August. So microwave path protection, Harold will be talking with you much more about this in the next couple of months. Right now we're awaiting final microwave path design before we bring this to your attention. But in order to place all of these microwave dishes on all of these tower sites that carries the backhaul of the system, we want to make sure that that path between all of those microwave dishes doesn't get blocked by a new building. And if a new building is going to go up in the area of that path, that some sort of mitigation has to be taken, usually equipment on one side of the building that carries it around to the other side, and then it carries it on its way toward the next microwave dish. So once we have that design in place, we have some ordinance, one particular ordinance that we're working on that we're looking for all jurisdictions with zoning and building code enforcement duties to implement, so that we can make sure and make those paths known to the public, and then also be able to implement and enforce any mitigation that would need to be done in order to maintain those paths. So we'll talk more about that in the coming months, but that will be something that will be coming before you as a council to act upon.
One thing too with the current fire code that we follow, that most of the jurisdictions follow, there is a provision in the code that requires new construction to have whatever it takes if they have limited penetration in a building. The hospital, for example, Progress West, very thick construction, a lot of steel. If we can't get good signal into that building, the fire code, as we look at those drawings before the building goes up, we can, as a fire agency, require them to put in a mitigation, a repeater, whatever it might be, to enhance the signal inside the building. So not only, as Jennifer said, you have to worry about through the building, but inside the building too. As firefighters, paramedics, and law enforcement officers are working in these buildings, we want to make sure their signal can get out. So the fire code currently has a provision where we can have those buildings built with those accommodations.
Do you have a question about
I was going to ask just about that. It was how the microwaves go through buildings, or how do you communicate once you're inside the building? I just didn't quite get the technology on that.
Some penetrate easily, some don't. It depends on the construction materials of the building. And we've already, as part of the process of designing this new system, had identified, I'll call them trouble spots, that we already know are issues. Like the sheriff down on Augusta Bottom Road. We have a list of everything within our venues that we have currently have problems with
All
getting
QTs.
radio signals in around. All QTs.
Oh, cute.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Those lead linings.
yeah, something it's unique to
The fire code you mentioned, is that adopted by all the fire districts in this county pretty well?
It is. I'd have to check. I know that the core departments, Central County, Cottleville, O'Fallon, Wentzville, all have the same code. There's a code enforcement group in the county that coordinates the fire codes. I don't know which versions the building codes are on, but for the fire codes, we're pretty much all in the same current code.
You touched on it just when you were talking earlier with calls going out. I can understand that, but during a disaster, with all these calls coming in, how do you prioritize which calls should be addressed first?
Initially, it's up to the dispatchers to do that, and they have some training on triaging those types of calls. Our goal is to get a forward command post set up as soon as possible and take that task away from the dispatch center so they can keep doing everything else they're doing, and they just dump the calls to us by computer, and we can look at them and we'll assign them. We'll triage them and say, go to this one first, go to this one second. So it's a triage system like you deal with a mass casualty, and the triage system is really based on the commander's experience that, yeah, we're going to have to put this one to the side, we're going to address this.
Okay, but you'll get them all at one time, but you'll
Once we get that forward
assess
command
which is
post
the
set up.
which has the most importance.
Correct. And a lot of times, even dispatch will call us, even a thunderstorm, something not as severe as a tornado, they'll call and they'll say, we have a call for wires arcing. And then the duty officer for our district would say, all right, put that one on hold. What else you got? And help them prioritize some of the calls. Because you can imagine, it's everything from structural collapses the night of the tornado to somebody having a heart attack or difficulty breathing. The routine emergencies that happen every day still continue to happen. So just a triage system.
I think that's all I had in terms of just information for you. If you have any other questions, anything that you want to know.
You can have person-to-person communications with this system without going through dispatch.
Correct.
That you don't have that now, do you?
We do.
Do you?
We do have that. And sometimes it comes down to that. In the current system, that's probably the saving grace, is that we can have person-to-person, radio-to-radio communication. A trunk system has two functions. One, it can go through the computer system that picks an open channel and does all that. But if that goes down, I still need to be able to talk to the firefighter inside the house or him back out to me. So we have the dual capability.
But I can't talk to him.
Not right now, no.
Not right now.
But you'll be able, this new system will be able to sort it out without all the crosstalk. You'll be able to.
Correct. It kind of takes your signal, and Dwayne could probably explain this better than I do, and it assigns it an open path.
You're doing great.
So and there's multiple open paths. So
Okay.
that's the difference. Right now we have one path. In this system, we'll have many paths.
And I have one last question for you. The agreements that you're working on with the different jurisdictions, are those all going pretty well? Is everybody ponying up what they need to make this work?
Yeah, I don't think we've had really any significant issues in terms of coming to terms. Yeah, we're not quite there yet. They aren't signed, but for the most part, we're doing okay. There are some, I think the main issues for all of the jurisdictions is, well, how do I participate in making decisions about this system? I mean, right now they get to make those decisions themselves, and in the new system, it'll be the county making the decisions for them. So we're setting up a structure that will allow for a board to be created to help have some input and recommendations in that process, so that they have some input still in how they utilize the system, how they allocate resources, and that sort of thing. So I think we're getting there.
Okay. My question. So we're about a year away from this thing being in total operation, and does that pretty much meet the timetable that we originally started with? It seemed like 2 years ago,
Really
2.5 years ago?
I don't really have a nice way of saying no, but no, it doesn't. We currently have a waiver from the FCC. You'll recall the original deadline in terms of not having any penalties was December 31st, 2012. So we had a waiver that went before the FCC and was approved to be able to get us through for another year to January 1, 2014. And we are, obviously, as you saw, that about 6 months behind that schedule. So we either have or will be submitting a waiver application within the next week or two. Did it go last week or went right now?
We will be submitting it
Okay.
here before Labor Day. We were actually the first waiver in the nation. And at the time, we were advised, even though they knew that we probably would not be done by December, that we should not ask for more than a year at a time. The third or fourth waiver, I forget which, got a 2-year extension. So they knew that we would not probably be fully done, but what they were looking for was substantial progress towards the goal, and we will clearly be able to show that.
And we are ahead of St. Louis County.
We are ahead of St. Louis County. We're aiming to be ahead of Jefferson County. Aren't we, Wayne?
We're either, we will be finishing neck and neck or a few weeks prior, yes.
Is anybody else around us up and running with this yet?
Well, St. Louis City has a compliance system already. Other statewide is compliant. I don't know if there's any other jurisdiction of
What
note.
statewide did was, they knew they couldn't afford to put in the system that we were putting in. And so they ended up spending, I guess, about 90 million statewide. And they put in a very thin, narrowband back haul, basically kept on VHF from what I understand, but narrowbanded. And they can't put a tremendous number of radios on at a time, but they basically have put one base station in each of the participating police departments and sheriff's departments so a dispatcher can get somebody on the system. And then there's a few areas where they've supplemented that with frequencies and other equipment like Rolla, Sykeston, and they're out searching for other areas. And they've also told us that they would like to talk to us about being able, when we're up and running next year, to tap in at the western edge and be able to go out the south so that the highway patrol could run on our system here.
Now, is this system going to allow us to talk to the other metros? It's the same system across for St. Louis, St. Charles,
Yes.
Lincoln, Warren? Okay.
St. Charles,
Not Lincoln.
St.
Not
Louis
Warren,
County,
not
and Jefferson
Warren.
County will all be on the same system.
The
We'll
5 USC
We'll be
counties.
tied to the city of St. Louis system, but no, Lincoln and Warren are not taking the same steps that we are in order to provide a system. They don't have, number one, the same level of demand for capacity as the urban area does, so they've chosen alternate solutions.
Okay.
And we're maintaining a VHF capacity on our radios so that if we have to go into Warren County or Lincoln County, we can still talk to them.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you all for your
My
work
pleasure.
on
Very,
this.
very
Thanks for your
complete.
support.
Be a good thing for the citizens, yes.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to see you again.
You too. Thanks.
Rob, take care.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Seeing you.
See you guys later. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work on that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Ron. You bet, Joe.
I don't know if Joanne wanted to update you guys on what's going on, but it's a mess. We're having a public hearing on it.
I don't know if we want to discuss this thing or not.